As part of Health by Design's ongoing commitment to behavioral health education, we present another lesson in our Fundamentals of Weight Management series. Here's the Medical Director of Health by Design, Dr. David Player.
Hello again. Welcome back to the first of our series on energy intake. I know we're going to have a little bit more fun today than we've had before, and I'm wearing this garb because we're going to talk about a different kind of topic than we've talked about before. I want to review for a little while the things that we've gone over in the first few lectures so that you have a sense of why it's important that someone understand the amount of energy contained in certain food items. The fundamental difficulty, as we've said now for several lectures, with people who come to Health by Design is that they have relatively low metabolic rates. The average woman who comes to Health by Design burns about 8 times her body weight. The average man burns somewhere around 10 times his body weight. And this, compared to people out in society that you and I compete with on a daily basis who are burning 12 and 14 or even 14 and 16 times their body weight, is an extremely difficult item. Now, thankfully or unthankfully, there are a few poor souls who are over here burning only 4 to 6 times their body weight per day. As I said 200 years ago, perhaps these people would not have been obese because of the tremendous amount of energy expenditure they had to do on a daily basis. If you thought about how somebody lived 100 years ago, they had to walk to the outhouse every day, they had to carry ice to the ice box, they had to chop wood, they had to pump water, they had to work on the farms, they walked behind mules and plows. Tremendous expense in calories just staying alive. And we therefore have a dilemma for these individuals in 20th century society because of machinery and computers and telephones. You think how a secretary at one of our local businesses works, and you realize what a great difficulty it is because these people sit in offices today for 8 to 10 hours a day. They then have to sleep for another 8 hours a day, and that leaves just a few hours a day, as we said a couple of lectures ago, to do all the other things in life that need to be done. And that, of course, creates a real dilemma because people who have low metabolic rates end up then storing more body fat and finally end up getting diseases that are related to increased body fat stores and the hormones that we talked about before. So we said that people who have that type of metabolic rate have to be smarter than these guys out here. These fellows, as I said, really don't have to be very smart about their bodies or about health. Their biggest job is having enough money to buy food. 100 years ago, these were the kind of guys who died by the wayside because they just could not get enough food to survive. Now we have an opposite kind of problem occurring with people who burn 8 to 10 times their body weight. So part of the education for those of us who have this type of metabolism, if you will, who have these types of metabolic rates, is that we have to understand a great deal about our energy expenditure, and secondarily, we have to understand energy intake. And remember that the energy output, if you will, is divided into 3 parts. We've been over those before, and I keep going over them because we have to understand them if we're ever going to change them. The resting metabolic rate accounts for about 70% of all that you and I burn per day, and this is our motor running. It runs while we're asleep. It runs while we're awake. It includes the metabolism of our hearts, our livers, our lungs, our muscles, our bones, our brains, all the things that require energy all day long. Now the second, as we spent a lot of time last session, was the thermic effect of activity, and I called activity our greatest ally for those of us who have bad metabolic rates, because it's activity that we can change, and we decided it didn't make too much difference what it was. We wanted it to be something that wasn't too painful, something that wouldn't destroy our muscles and bones and joints, something that was cheap, and something that would burn a lot of calories. And I made a case, if you'll remember, for saying that walking was one of the neatest things you and I could do because it fulfills all of those criteria. That's our TEA. Finally, we have our TEF, the thermic effect of digestion or of food. That accounts for about 10% of all the things you and I burn. And we'll spend more time in other lectures talking about how you and I can keep our TEF fairly high. It's most important that individuals with low metabolic rates understand these 3 things about themselves and have a good estimate of what their energy output is, because if they don't, they have no idea what they can eat. And I sure as heck would like to know what I'm going to eat. Now, remember that when individuals like us go on diets and we lower our EI, the very first thing we do is lower our resting metabolic rate. It may go down by 10 or 15% or more. And the way we counter that is by keeping our protein content high in our diet. We maintain good protein intakes and vitamins and minerals that keep us from losing lean mass. And if, as I said last session, we keep our exercise levels high, we maintain good lean mass, and we maintain better resting metabolic rates. So if we keep our protein content at a good level, and remember those of you who are taking diet supplements already are doing so as to maintain good protein intakes while you are in a calorie cutback state here on energy intake. Now, when we start talking about food, we need to have some measure of its value to us in energy. And the way we measure food is just like we talked about measuring energy expenditure last time with exercise. We measure food in calories. And remember, a calorie is the amount of heat necessary to raise 1 cc of water 1 degree. It's a calorie. And we talk about kilocalories here when we deal with foods. So foods are measured in calories in the same way that exercise is measured in calories. So eventually you get to thinking of 1 mile on the road for me is sort of like 1 handful of peanuts, or 1 mile on the road walking is like an apple. And we have equivalent experiences then in food and in energy expenditure. Now it's important that if we're going to talk about food in terms of calories in or calories out to have some basic standards that are easy for us. And I think as a kid or as a young man, when somebody talked to me about calories in a cup or calories in a gob or calories in a teaspoon or those kinds of funny numbers, I didn't have the foggiest idea what a cup or a half cup or a teaspoon or those sorts of things really looked like when we were talking about certain kinds of foods. And we've learned over the years in dealing with management of obesity that patients have to have an easy system that works. And the way we've decided to do this and what works the best is to equate foods in so many calories for an ounce, because we can finally get used to weighing things in our hands. And I expect you in those laboratory sessions to be weighing and holding and get a feel for how much something weighs. So if we know how to equate every food in calories per ounce, we'll be way far ahead, and we should be able to have some kind of simple thing that works. Now, the way we start with this is to put a scale out here, and you can see I have things starting with 0 calories. Nothing is less than 0, and the only food that's at 0 that I know of is pure water. So water is at 0, and it goes all the way over here to at 250 calories is pure oil. There is nothing more caloric than oil. As someone said, it really doesn't make any difference whether it's peanut oil or popcorn oil or whatever kind of oil it is, Bardol for that matter, it's 250 calories per ounce. Now the truth is that about 98% of all the stuff you and I are going to eat in our lifetime are less than 125 calories, which is halfway up the scale. So you can say that 98% of the stuff is over in here. And I imagine if you took an average of all the things that people eat, that it would be somewhere down here around 60 to 70 calories per ounce. 60 to 70 calories per ounce. So if you and I didn't know, and we walked into a room and we had, let's say you had a casserole and you didn't have the foggiest idea what was in it, and you said, gee, but I weighed it on my fork and it seemed like about an ounce, and you looked at your plate and said, I think there are 6 ounces there, then you could say, I think that's going to be about a 70-calorie item. 6 ounces times 70 is 420 calories, and you've got a pretty good idea of what to throw into your records. Now, if you thought that the food had a lot more oil in it, obviously oil takes things this direction. So you've got oil going over here, and you've got water coming this direction, and you can make a pretty good guess either side of 60 or 70 calories an ounce where a certain food would lie. Now before we go any farther, I want to review something that we had way back in Lecture 1, and that's the number of calories per unit of a certain kind of nutrient. Remember, we only have 4 nutrients. The first of those was protein, and we said that protein equals 4 calories per ounce. Next food, anybody? Right, carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are at 4 calories per ounce. The third food is fats, and fats we said were very intense in calories. They had about 9 calories per ounce. And the final food was, right, we drink it, right, alcohol. Alcohol is 7 calories per ounce. So the way I'd like you to view almost every food when we start talking about energy intake, EI up here, is to be able to first of all analyze the food and say what is in that food. What is it that's there? Because if you don't have any idea what's in it, you're not going to be able to guess the calories either side of the average. So just remember which foods are here and then try to go back to them. As we've learned in our laboratory sessions, there are other things in foods besides those 4 nutrients. There are fiber, and there's water. But by and large, natural foods that you and I would go by would have carbohydrates, proteins, fats, water, and fiber. Maybe there's some food that would have alcohol, but certainly not very many. Now, most of you here at Health by Design who are doing a program to cut back on body fat are making efforts to eat largely diet supplements, I know. And diet supplements are pretty easy because they're mixtures of proteins and carbohydrates together. And really a very high percentage of what you are eating in total calories is protein. And I think that's why we feel good, because we're getting adequate amounts of protein to cover our losses of nitrogen in our urine. And almost all of you are very close to what we call nitrogen balance right now, which is where you're matching how much urea you have in your urine with how much protein you are taking in your diet. Now, as we go along, though, you're going to want to begin to add other kinds of foods to diet supplements. I think that people who have this type of metabolic rate up here probably in a sedentary society have to take some kind of diet supplement food on a daily basis. So as you begin to get farther out and your body fat contents are more where you would like them, you would probably move to taking diet supplements plus some other foods that have carbohydrates in them. And so as we approach our discussion of energy intake, I want to teach you first and develop a system that will allow you to learn things that have more carbohydrate in them. And those foods are really just 3. They are fruits, vegetables, and grains. And today in this session we're going to deal with fruits and vegetables. In a few weeks we'll get on with looking at grains. Now we'll start with fruits first, and fruits are interesting, and I kind of like to add fruits, as I told you way back in the beginning, because fruits taste good when we mix them with diet supplements, and probably many of you are adding little bits of fruit to your diet supplements or eating fruit on the side. It really doesn't make too much difference. So I think that's what we'll start with, because I think you have to know fruits first. Now fruits really divide into 2 groups. One of them are our standard things that you and I'd call fruits. The guy says, well, how do you define a fruit? Well, I guess a fruit is something that grows on a tree out there in the world. It has flowers and it turns into a fruit and we eat it. Something growing on trees. There may be some exceptions. As a guy said, you include peanuts in your fruits, and peanuts grow in the ground, and that's true. But almost everything we talk about here today is something that flowers on a bush or a tree and then turns into something that we call fruit. Now the fruits, as I said, divide into 2 categories. One of them have very low calories and have a lot of water with them. And the other are items that have a little less water, have a little bit of oil, and I call those funny fruits. So we got regular fruits and we got funny fruits. And for all intents and purposes, fruits are mixtures of really 4 or 5 things. Fruits have carbohydrates. They're almost all carbohydrates. They have some fiber. They have water. And they have very small amounts of protein. There are a few fruits, as I said, that have a tiny amount of fat, and you and I don't have to think about them unless we eat them, but as we go through our fruits that are out here on the table today, I'll certainly make note of them, because if you eat them, you have to know what's in them, and you have to understand that they have fat in them and that they therefore have more total calories. Now I think with that we'll go ahead and start with our fruit items, and I'll move down here to the right end of the table. And the first group of fruits that we're going to look at today are the 15-calorie type fruits. These are low-calorie fruits. They're things that you and I can safely eat quite a lot of. They're mixtures of fiber, water, and carbohydrates, and I think you'd view them as largely carbohydrate foods. And we have a lot of really good-looking stuff here today. Now, it's important for you to remember that we mess up more on the ounces, on the weight, than on the calories per ounce. And although there are some items here today that have more than 15 calories per ounce, I'd like, as this sign says, for you to view these as 15 calorie per ounce items. If you took an average of all the fruits on this plate on this setup, there's no doubt that you would have about 15 calories per ounce. Now over here we have bananas, and of course bananas have peels on them. You say, well, how do I weigh a banana? Well, if you weigh a banana on a scales, and many of you have small scales at home, you could call the bananas about 15 calories an ounce. After you peel the banana, and you're eating just the fruit of the banana, the truth is that it's something a little over 20 calories an ounce. But unless you're like a thoracic surgeon friend of mine who I call the banana man, that isn't too important. If you're eating a banana here and there and an orange here and there or an apple here and there, it isn't too important to change from that 15 calories an ounce. Now if you're eating 10 bananas a day, then I think you'd better call the banana 20 calories an ounce instead of 15 calories an ounce. We have an apple, and apples are perhaps a little under 15 calories an ounce, but obviously they vary depending on whether you're eating delicious apples or Granny Smith. So you're left then with saying, what's an apple? Well, it's about 15 calories an ounce. Grapes, maybe a little bit more than 15 calories an ounce, but again, the major problem here is figuring out how many ounces of grapes you have. Here we have pineapple, which may have a little bit more than 15, but then we have strawberries that have a little less than 15. We have apricots, and we have peaches, we have cherries, there are some ripe figs here. We have all of our citrus fruits down here. Your citrus may come in a little bit lower than 15 calories an ounce. Most of them, for instance, the lemons and the limes are obviously down there much lower than 15. Oranges may come in right at 15. Kiwi fruit, probably a little less than 15. Blueberries, less than 15. We have our melons. Melons are kind of a special case because clearly if you just go grab a melon and put it on a scale, you're going to weigh a whole bunch of rind and that kind of stuff that's probably going to have have almost no calories in it. And I think the way we like to view melons is sort of like the watermelon over here. You're actually going with the measured fruit of the melon, and here you're talking about around 10 to 15 calories per ounce. Cut up bananas, as I said, are about 20. Cut up fruit, kiwi maybe a little. Cut up cantaloupe here, or muskmelon, is very low in calories and excellent food. Some of these, as a nephrologist, are very important to me because they're very high potassium items, and many of our patients can't eat much potassium. It's important for you who are in this program, of course, who are needing extra potassium to know that fruits have lots. Officially, a couple of bananas here have about the same number of milliequivalents of potassium as one of the 10 milliequivalent tablets that you're taking. So these are in general the 15 calorie per ounce items, and they're very safe for you. You have to know how many ounces you have if you're going to know how many total calories you're eating. Now we can take fruits and squeeze out the juice, and it's interesting that the juice of fruit comes out to about 15 calories an ounce also. So when I look at this glass of grape juice or this glass of orange juice here or some apple juice, almost all of those are around 15 calories per ounce. And there may be some exceptions there, some very heavy fruit items, maybe peach nectar and things like that are closer to 20 or 22 calories an ounce. Again, if you don't know specifically and you're not eating a truckload of one kind of fruit, go ahead and call it 15 because you're not going to miss very often on calories per ounce. What you're going to mess up on again is in your total ounces. And I expect you in your laboratory sessions then to get familiar with what an ounce of fruit feels like. And you'll only do that if you practice. I know I've screwed that up so bad over the years, and you just have to make an effort at weighing things, holding them in your hands, and lifting them. Now these are the regular fruits. Oh, one other thing we can look at in regular fruit here is our canned fruits, because when you get to canned fruits, you have to start reading labels a little bit. Now I have 2 cans here, and this one is a light one, and light fruit in a can is generally in its own juice or in some water. And this particular one has 4 ounces for 60 calories, so that's 15 calories an ounce. So you could say that all of your light fruit is 15 calories per ounce. But if you go to the next can, and it might be sitting right next to it on the shelf, we see that 4 ounces here is about 80 calories, so we're talking about 20 calories an ounce, and this is sliced peaches in heavy syrup. What is the item that causes more calories? Right, it's more sugar. Remember, as we'll get into in our grain lecture, sugar is around 100 calories an ounce, so we're left with understanding if you put more sugar with your fruit, you have to pay the price of more calories per ounce. Now there's a few other things we can do with fruits over here. You can dry them and take away all the water that's in the fruits. And here I have a nice bowl of dried fruits. These things look wonderful to me, and I really love dried fruits, as I'm sure many of you do. Raisins, dried apricots, dried pineapples, prunes, dates. All of those things have between 75 and 80 calories an ounce. I'd call them 75 because I like multiples of 25. So I'd say that maybe these are 15, but when you take away the water, you're left with 75 calories an ounce. Now these things fill you up a lot more. Very high, very concentrated form of calories and potassium. Good for us perhaps, but much higher in calories, and you have to again get the sense of what does an ounce of raisins really feel like. Now that's group 1. That's the stuff with very few calories. Let's go on. As I said, there's group 2 of fruits which are out here before me, and I call all this stuff funny fruits because funny fruits have little bits of fat with them, and you have to know what they are if you eat them. Now shoot, if you don't eat them, don't waste your time learning them. Occasionally all of us run into olives. And in olives you have 2 different groups. One of them are the green olives. And green olives are lighter in calories. They have about 30 calories per ounce. I don't know what the pimento is, but it isn't much. But the olives themselves are 30 calories per ounce. Our black olives, however, get upwards of 50 calories per ounce. 50 for the black ones, 30 for the green ones. Now your avocados, the black ones, are around 50 calories per ounce. Interestingly, the green ones are only 30 calories per ounce, but we called around to most of our restaurants here in town and to the produce markets, and the produce manager said that 90 to 95% of the avocados that we use to make guacamole here in the Southwest are made with black avocados. So you can say when you and I have guacamole, if it isn't mixed with mayonnaise or something else, that it's made with 50 calorie per ounce avocados. Now the next funny fruit goes a lot higher in calories, and it's coconut. And when you eat coconut right off the tree here, and we have several examples of that, coconut is about 100 calories per ounce. It has a lot of oil. The coconut milk has oil in it, and a lot of us love the taste of coconut, and that's because it has a lot of oil in it. It's starting to taste better. It is a fruit. It grows on a tree, but it has 100 calories an ounce until you dry it and sweeten it and put it in a can. And this coconut here in front of me, which tastes quite good when we eat it, is about 150 calories per ounce. And you have to get used to knowing how much coconut was on things. Now it's true that it takes a lot of coconut to make an ounce. I think I'd probably have to take a handful of coconut to get up to an ounce here. But coconut clearly is very caloric, has about 150 calories an ounce in those little blue cans that you and I buy at the store. Finally, we get to the last funny fruit, and here's one that you and I would eat a lot of if we had time to do so. And how many times I've sat on an airplane and somebody came by with peanuts and I ate one and then I ate another little package and I felt kind of full afterwards. And of course, peanuts and all of the nuts are the highest of the funny fruits, as I call them. They have 175 calories per ounce on an average. Some of the highest ones, like macadamia nuts, go up over 200 calories an ounce. Why do they? Well, it's because they're made of almost pure oil. Like somebody has said, well, I think nuts are a pretty good source of protein, and I guess nuts do have protein in them, probably 4 grams per ounce, as we'll get into. But can you imagine that a cashew or a peanut or an almond or a walnut or a pecan, all of these things are 80 to 90% oil by calories, and they just are not something that we who have relatively low metabolic rates get to eat very much of. Somebody said, well, Dave, why don't you just show us what an ounce of nuts looks like? And I'll take my scale here just a second. And I want to take a look at this because many times I'll just grab a handful of nuts. I don't think about what a bunch of nuts weighs. I just grab whatever there is. And let me just take a bunch of these almonds. This is kind of an average size handful, as you can see. Gee, it doesn't look like much to me. You take my little bowl. I'm going to have to re-zero here. And you'll have to take my word for it. But that little handful of nuts was about 1.5 ounces. So we're talking about in the neighborhood of 300 calories for this little tiny pile of almonds. We could do the same thing for peanuts. I'm much more likely to grab a gob of peanuts. And how many times have I walked through a kitchen and grabbed that many peanuts? That's nothing. I've eaten twice that many peanuts many times. Let me put them here in the bowl. It's already zeroed. I did throw a few almonds in there. That was, again, 1 ounce of peanuts, 175 calories of peanuts. No way. Many times I've eaten 3 or 4 times that much. And we see then that items like peanuts and cashews and so forth are very high in calories and can cost us a lot when we are people with metabolic rates of 8 and 10 times our body weight. One time for Christmas, somebody gave me a 5-pound box of cashews, a 5-pound box. And you know, over the Christmas holidays, I ate the whole thing. Maybe the rest of my family had a little. And that, I gained about 6 or 7 pounds that Christmas, and the 6 or 7 pounds was real fat, and almost all of it came from the nuts. Now, a person could say, well, how much protein is in these foods, Dave? Because if I wanted to have, if I want to eat a good protein diet, I want to get my 80 grams in, and I don't want to eat this diet supplement stuff forever, can I make up my protein in these fruits? And I think here you have to understand that these kinds of items have extremely low protein per unit ounce. For instance, nuts are the highest of all the fruits in protein, and almonds and cashews have about 4 grams of protein per ounce. Now let's say you were a guy and you'd done your 24-hour urine for urea and you knew that you needed 80 grams of protein a day. And there's 4 grams per ounce in nuts, so it would take about 20 ounces of nuts. And 20 ounces of nuts of this type are about 3,500 calories. So you could get all of your protein in a day if you were willing to eat 3,500 calories of nuts. You'd be plenty fat after you tried to get your protein in with all of your nuts. Similarly, if you go to some of these other fruits down at the other end, let's kind of look at some of these again for a second. If you used bananas as your protein source, now bananas and almost all of these fruits here have about 1/2 gram of protein per ounce, only 1/2 gram. They have much more water, and the water dilutes out the protein. So we got 1/2 gram per ounce. So if you needed 80 grams of protein, you would have to have 160 ounces of bananas, and 160 ounces of bananas has somewhere around 3,200 calories if you multiply 160 times 20. So you see here again that bananas and apples and oranges and melons and peaches and things like that are not good protein sources, and you would not use them routinely for protein intake. So I think that's about the story with fruit. As I'll say again and again, the importance here is not that you worry too much about the calories per ounce. I'd call almost all of them 15 calories per ounce. Your biggest struggle, as mine, is in knowing how many ounces you had. And the only way you learn that, and I've learned it the hard way, is by holding things in your hand. Holding things in your hand. Hold the apricots. Know that about 6 or 8 of these things together is about 1 ounce. And once you get down and you know how much they are, you have a good chance of solving this problem. Remember that the fundamental reason that we're doing all of this is because people have relatively low metabolic rates. And because we have low metabolic rates, we have to understand energy intake and energy output. Vegetables are our second item that has lots of carbohydrates in it. And vegetables are a little easier than fruits because there are no funny vegetables. And vegetables really break into 2 categories. There are the green leafy things that are about 10 calories per ounce. 10 calories per ounce. And the starchier vegetables that are up here at about 25 calories per ounce. And as I said, there really are no funny vegetables. Vegetables are not, almost no vegetables have oils in them. You have to kind of just get used to thinking of vegetables as one of those 2 types, either starchy ones or green leafy ones. Now, one of the things that always comes up when we talk about vegetables is the problem of protein. And you know that there are vegetarians out there. One of the problems that people have, and I've noticed this as a physician when I look at their serum albumin levels or their serum globulin levels, is that people who eat pure vegetables have a lot of problems getting their amino acids and getting all of their protein in that they need in a day. And that's again because vegetables are made up of water, carbohydrate, fiber, and a tiny amount of protein. And again, the protein per ounce of vegetables is not very much, and you have to eat a lot of vegetables to get all your protein in. The other problem that you may have heard about is an amino acid problem, where there are some foods that have most of the amino acids that you need to make a whole protein in your body, and there are other foods that lack some of those amino acids. And for instance, there is no vegetable that I know that has all of the amino acids that you and I need. Therefore, one could not eat beans alone, or one could not eat rice alone. But if you ate rice and beans together, you could get all of your amino acids in, and you could make all of the proteins that your body needs to do its job. So you have to have a sense then of, if you were going to eat vegetables and know that you're getting nothing but vegetables, you have to eat mixtures of vegetables to be able to make all of your body proteins. Practically speaking, what most vegetarians do is become ovo-vegetarians or lacto-vegetarians, meaning that they eat eggs or dairy products that give them good sources of protein with their foods. Now, let's go over a couple of those just to give you an example of how much a person would have to eat of a certain vegetable to be able to make all of his protein requirements. We have over here in our starchy vegetables, we have beans, and pinto beans and lima beans and those kinds of beans have somewhere around 1 1/2 to 2 grams of protein per ounce. So you take a cup of beans, maybe 8 ounces of beans has about 12 grams of protein. Now let's say that you were going to need 80 grams of protein again to solve your problem. Well, 80 grams of protein, let's see, would give you about, you need about 53 total ounces of beans, and that would give you 1,850 calories per day of protein, 1,850 calories per day. That would be a boring diet, and you'd be really gassy by the time you got all of those beans in. Now, if you were trying to do it with something other than beans, let's say you were going to eat carrots here. Where do I have carrots on? Yeah, here's some carrots over here. And if you were going to try to eat carrots for all of your protein, carrots only have in the neighborhood of 1/2 gram of protein per ounce. And that means that if you needed 80 grams of protein, you'd need 160 ounces of carrots. That's about 10 pounds of carrots per day. You'd be yellow if you were trying to get that many carrots for all your protein. So you can see some of the dilemma just eating beans and rice is getting all of your protein in with few enough calories that you don't end up being fat. And if you're somebody here who burns 8 or 10 times his or her body weight per day, you're going to struggle getting in 80 grams of protein per day on a diet. And we said, remember, that when you cut your calories back, when EI comes down, protein must go up. We know it because the urinary urea rises. So you have to eat more protein when you're on a diet, and it's extremely difficult to meet your protein requirements when you are eating vegetables alone. You just have a lot of trouble doing it. Now, as I said, we have 2 groups of vegetables, and I'll talk about them here as they're in front of me. Most of this stuff right here in front, as this chart says, is around 10 or 15 calories per ounce, 10 or 15 calories per ounce. And I would, some of these are less than 10 or 15 calories per ounce. For instance, I would go with tomatoes being in the neighborhood of 5 to 7. The green stuff like lettuce and cabbage and sprouts are down around 3 to 5. Vegetables really break out at somewhere between 0 and 30, and all of the things before me on this tray, cauliflower, squash, zucchini, beets, peppers, carrots, tomatoes, asparagus, celery, various kinds of squash, green beans, onions, all of those things are somewhere around 10 calories per ounce, maybe 15, and I would just for government work call them around 10 calories per ounce. Now over here you get to the starchier items, which are 25 to 30 calories an ounce, and some of these may not make 25, a few may be more. On the average we call them 25 or 30, and here you have mainly my hallmark food is potatoes. Almost all of your potatoes are around 25 calories an ounce. Corn is around 25 calories an ounce. Garlics, onions, those sorts of things have little bits. Garlic especially has oil in it a little bit, so it gives you a little bit more. Sweet potatoes tend to be 25. Peas tend to be 25. Those are the things that you and I can eat and eat safely, but have to be a little careful about the total ounces. Practically speaking, this stuff over here, you can eat volumes and volumes of it, and if you cook it, for instance, cooked broccoli or cooked cauliflower with Molly butter or with salt, or cooked zucchini or cooked yellow squash, those are wonderful kinds of foods, and you can eat them all day to the point that you're about to bust, and it's very, very few calories. The potato over here, you take a classic potato that's maybe a 10-ounce potato, 10 times 30 gives you close to 300. 10 times 25, maybe 250. So you have to have a better sense of what you're doing when you use the starchy vegetables. Now, the one area of vegetables you have to be careful of here is the canned vegetables. And again, like you had to do with canned fruits, you have to learn to read labels with canned vegetables. This first can is pinto beans that's made with water. It has no fat in it. There's no bacon. There's no beef. There's no sugar. And this particular 4-ounce item has about 90 calories. So we're talking about about 22, 23 calories per ounce for those pinto beans. Some beans actually come a little bit more concentrated than that, like soybeans and things are closer to 35. Now this can of beans has a slab of bacon and some sugar in it. It probably tastes a little bit better, but it has a little over, it has 105 calories. So we're dealing with something that's about 27 to 30 calories an ounce. Again, you have to kind of know what you're doing when you're looking at canned items. Now, as we could do with fruit juice, remember we could take fruit and we could get the juice out, and I told you it's still 15 calories an ounce with the juice. But with vegetables, on an average, if you look over here at our V8 or our tomato juice, this stuff goes clear down to 5 calories an ounce. So you could drink 3 times as much tomato juice or V8 as you could grape juice or orange juice or some other kind of fruit juice. So it's important to understand that also. I think those are the major things that I wanted to say about vegetables. Vegetables in general is what I would like to add first to diet supplements, except that diet supplements don't taste so great when you put a rutabaga into your diet supplement. So I think the reason we go with fruits first, even though we're a little higher in calories, is because they taste so good when we put them with supplements. Again, I might add that the major problem here is not in knowing calories per ounce. It's real easy. If you call these all 10 or 15 and these all 25 or 30, the major thing you've got to know is how many ounces are in it. And I expect you to get that in the little nutrition labs that are conducted during the clinical hours. If you don't lift things, you don't carry them, you don't weigh them, you won't have a sense for what's in things. I think that'll be it for today, and during our next time we'll go on into the other carbohydrate items, which are grain items. They're a little more interesting because with grain things we start adding oil to them and get all sorts of interesting concoctions like donuts and croissants and so forth. So until that time I'll leave you. Please spend a lot of time today in your nutrition lab learning how to weigh fruits and vegetables.